Alright, hello everybody, FriendlyRedd here, and welcome to something a bit different. We're halfway through 2024, as crazy as that sounds, and because of that, I wanted to put together something special. There's been a lot of really great games that have graced us with their existence during this first half of the year. I wanted to take some time to reflect on the titles I really enjoyed so far, and talk about them a bit here. Essentially, I looked back at these past 6 months, and picked out my favorite game I played for each of them. You could think of this as a pseudo-potential Game of the Year list, as it is very likely that some of these games will pop back up on my Game of the Year 2024 video once that time comes. For now, let's just stay on topic and focus on my favorite games of 2024 thus far. Each month I'll have a single game picked out for it, but I will also include some honorable mentions alongside the headliner. Without further delay, here are my favorite games of the first half of 2024. Starting in January, we have Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Not only is this my favorite release for January, it was the truly first big release of the year for me, and one that delivered. To start, I'll say that I'm actually not too knowledgeable about the Prince of Persia series as a whole. In fact, I don't think I'd ever even played any of the previous games before this one here, but I of course knew about them, or at least the Sands of Time. Be that as it may, ever since this game here was revealed, I was pretty interested in it. Not only would it be my introduction to the series, but it was looking to just be a really solid 2D action game slash Metroidvania, which is a genre I'm very much a fan of. And that's another cool thing to note about The Lost Crown, being the fact that, yeah, Prince of Persia was returning to its 2D roots. Until this year, the series had largely abandoned that style of game, as once the 2000s came around, the series was primarily, if not entirely, in 3D. A fate many 2D originating franchises also succumbed to around that era in gaming. Anyways, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown released on January 18th, and I picked it up right then and there, as not only was my personal interest in the game high, but many media outlets and reviewers loved the game, giving it high praise and great scores. And yeah, speaking from my own experience of playing the game, it was all well deserved, as The Lost Crown is an insanely fun game with tight and snappy controls, satisfying combat, a great visual style, and the weird supernatural powers that are usually present in the series. Personally, I think this is the best Metroidvania game to release since Metroid Dread, and while I don't think this game tops that one, I will say that it gets pretty damn close to sitting right alongside it. Overall, this was a great introduction to the Prince of Persia series, and a fantastic game to start the new year off with. Wholly recommend it to anyone who enjoys 2D platformers, action games, or of course more specific examples like Metroid, Hollow Knight, Bloodstained, and Castlevania. Moving on into February, or as I refer to it as February, we had quite a stacked lineup of games that month. Some killer indie releases like Balatro and Penny's Big Breakaway really took me by surprise with how much I enjoyed them, and Helldivers 2 did the whole Helldivers 2 thing. But going back to the whole February thing, you may be wondering what that's all about. Well, you see, February 2024 was a month that housed 3 large JRPG releases within it, all with names or subtitles that had "re" somewhere in there. The 3 titles in question were Persona 3 Reload, Granblue Fantasy Re-Link, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And all 3 of those games were ones I was very much looking forward to playing, and it's here where we come to my pick for my favorite game of February 2024. Honestly, this was both an easy and hard decision to make, as I greatly enjoyed my time with all 3 of these games. And 2 of them in particular were games I was waiting on for what felt like forever. In the end though, my pick has to go to Persona 3 Reload. Persona 3 is one of my most favorite games ever made, and was one of the reasons I even got into JRPGs as a whole, as it was one of the earliest JRPGs I remember playing right alongside The World Ends With You. However, the original can be pretty hard to go back to nowadays, especially if you got into the series with Persona 5, like many people did. On top of that, due to the many different versions of Persona 3 that released over the years, each with differing amounts of content and features, it was hard to go and easily recommend someone play one version over another, as there were various pros and cons to each. Thus, the idea of Persona 3 getting a full remake, bringing it more in line with the updated gameplay, visuals, and presentation of Persona 5, while also combining all the various pieces of content from all the prior versions into one big, modern, definitive release, well, it was something myself and many Persona fans, and JRPG fans as a whole, dreamed of for years and years. And thankfully, we finally got that this year on February 2nd, for the most part. Persona 3 Reload is an amazing remake of the original game. Personally, it did not disappoint me in the slightest during my playthrough of it. The new visuals are a joy to behold, the new music, I think, is better than the original in some regards, the turn-based battles feel impactful and look flashy and satisfying, and everything else was all done so well that, to me, this is now the definitive way to play Persona 3, even if it technically still isn't the definitive version of Persona 3 with regards to the content within. Persona 3 Reload is indeed a remake of Persona 3, but really, just the original version of Persona 3. While there are some aspects of the new content from the later versions, Fez and Portable, within Reload, it's not all here. Meaning that while this is the most easily accessible and best playing version of Persona 3, it's still sadly not truly wholly the best. And honestly, I can understand why that upsets people. Heck, for as much as I enjoy this remake, there is a part of me that is still disappointed that this isn't the true definitive edition of Persona 3. A single game that is everything from the original, everything from Fez, and everything from Portable, wrapped up into one amazing package. We are set to get the answer, or episode Eidos, later this year's DLC, which means at the very least Reload will be on par with Fez, but sadly the female protagonist route from Portable, it doesn't seem to be happening. Frankly, I could go on and on about this one game alone, but we probably should continue on and get to my next pick. In summary, just know that, for me personally, Atlus did a remarkable job fully remaking one of my all-time favorites, and while it does have some cons, the pros far outweigh them. Persona 3 remains one of the finest JRPGs ever made, and is a great way to get introduced to the series if you've been interested in doing so. The third time's the charm, and the third month's the one with the sequel that took 12 years to finally release. Yes, my pick for March 2024 goes to Dragon's Dogma 2, which actually shares some similarities with our previous discussion point, Persona 3 Reload, with regards to reception. Now, I think in comparison, Reload was much more widely praised and acclaimed, and any problems or issues that it has don't quite compete with Dragon's Dogma 2 here. For sure, Dragon's Dogma 2 is not a perfect game, and in some ways is rather disappointing as a sequel to Dragon's Dogma. I will not deny that. For me though, it remained very enjoyable throughout my first playthrough, and it's a game I still like to hop into every now and then. I've had this thought before, and it may sound weird, but Dragon's Dogma 2 almost feels kind of like a medieval fantasy simulator in some regards. Like, the game doesn't really have a lot of conveniences you would find in a lot of modern open world games, instead requiring you to travel around manually most of the time, for example, which I think makes the game stand out amongst its peers. Traveling in the game constantly gave me the feeling of going on a new adventure, which by itself would be boring if all you were doing was walking, but when the game has combat that's as good as it is, combined with the pawn system, which allowed for my journeys to always have fresh faces alongside me, it kept me entertained and having fun, even if the constant walking or cart riding itself was mundane in the grand scheme of things. This is probably the most polarizing game on the entire list, and again, I fully understand people's problems with the game, and in some cases agree with them. In the end though, it wasn't enough to stop me from enjoying the game when I first played it, and still enjoying it now. I do hope as time goes on, more of these issues can be fixed, and there are rumors that the game may receive an expansion later this year, or early next year, that adds a ton to the game, similar to what occurred with the original Dragon's Dogma getting expanded upon with Dark Arisen. Only time will tell, but for now, let's move on to the next pick. April has quite a stellar release here, didn't it? Yep, my pick for April 2024 goes to Stellar Blade, the first console outing by developer Shift Up. These guys are mainly known in the mobile game space for their work on Goddess of Victory Nikke, but they stepped into the AAA gaming space this year with the release of Stellar Blade, exclusively on PlayStation 5 on April 26. And let me tell you, they knocked it out of the park. Looking back on it now, and even while I was playing, I was shocked just how well put together Stellar Blade is. For a first-time console game from a mobile-centric developer, they deliver one of the most polished and well-performing games of the year. And on top of all that, the game is just stupid fun to boot. I went into this game expecting it to be another full-on Souls-like, but it turned out to be quite different from my initial expectations. It's an interesting mix of ideas you'd find in Souls-likes and character action games, mashed together into this very tight and responsive sci-fi romp. The combat is very flashy and punchy, with great feeling and animation behind all your standard and special attacks. I also have to give a shout out to the soundtrack, as there are some truly great pieces of music in this game. You know a game has a good soundtrack when you find yourself listening to the music outside the game, and patiently awaiting the release of the full OST. Fast and fun combat, a great soundtrack, and interesting characters and story, you've got yourself one of the best single-player games of the year. And what might just end up being the best PlayStation 5 exclusive of the year, at least it could have been, but Astro's coming back in September to take that crown. Anyways, yeah, if you've got a PlayStation 5 and like Souls-likes or character action games, give Stellar Blade a go. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. This next pick may appear flat, but I assure you, it's anything but. Yes, my pick for May 2024 goes to the remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I actually just rolled credits on this game the same day I began writing this script, and man, felt so good to play The Thousand Year Door again, now in an official capacity and with gorgeous HD visuals. I alluded to this in my Redd's Radar video for May, but what else can I really add that hasn't been said before about The Thousand Year Door? There's a reason this game has such a legendary status and passionate fanbase behind it. It's really damn good. And this remake on Nintendo Switch is the best way to play the game. Sure, you don't get the same level of fluidity that the GameCube original offered with its 60 FPS performance, but honestly, having played the game fully now on Switch, you'll get used to the 30 FPS pretty quickly. And the timing differences on action commands for combat weren't all too noticeable for me, which I imagine will be the case for most players. If you're looking for a colorful, quirky, and charming RPG with a great cast of characters, memorable locales, banging soundtrack, and a story that actually has some rather somber and touching moments, look no further. The Thousand Year Door has all that and more, alongside the simple but still engaging combat that's still yet to be topped in the Paper Mario series. It's such a distinct and fun game, one that does a really cool balancing act of feeling not like a typical Mario adventure, while still having a lot of the series staples. With the original Paper Mario on the Nintendo Switch Online app, and now this remake of The Thousand Year Door on the console itself, I can confidently say that the best of the Paper Mario series can now be played on one platform. And if you enjoy Mario and/or RPGs, you absolutely need to give them a play. But don't feel too obligated to play the original before The Thousand Year Door, however, as it can absolutely be enjoyed as a standalone game without having played or having knowledge of the N64 original. But that's enough gushing about The Thousand Year Door for now. Let's move on to our final talking point. At last, we find ourselves in the present, in June of 2024. Honestly, this month and summer as a whole tend to be lighter on the game release front, and while I have picked up a few games that have released, none of them can really come close to what is my pick for this month. Sure, I'm sort of cheating with this pick, as it isn't technically a standalone game release like all my other picks were, but really, I think it still stands on its own with regards to how much content is here. My hints didn't make it obvious. My pick for June 2024 is none other than the DLC expansion for Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, because this is still such a fresh release, and also due to me not having played too much of it yet, I'm going to keep my talk on this one brief. Additionally, I'm not going to show too much footage from the DLC either, as to avoid spoilers. So, Shadow of the Erdtree. We've been waiting quite some time for DLC for Elden Ring, and it makes sense it took longer than previous FromSoft DLCs, as I'm sure it was quite a monumental task for them. I mean, Elden Ring is already a stacked game, so how do you meaningfully add to all of what's already there? Well, it wasn't easy, and it took over 2 years from the initial launch of the base game, but I can say that from what I've seen and played so far, they delivered way more than I think any of us were really expecting. Now, I actually had to wait a bit to finish this last part of the script, as I needed to, well, you know, play the DLC a bit before I could talk about it more. I've put in about 12 hours or so into Shadow of the Erdtree so far, and yeah, it is indeed more Elden Ring, which is exactly what I was expecting and hoping for. It's for sure quite a challenge too, and I'll admit that it started out pretty rough for me on my end. However, after tweaking my build and doing more exploration to find more Scadu tree fragments and revered spirit ashes, items that power you up in the DLC area, it's become much more manageable and enjoyable for me. If you're jumping into the DLC, I'd caution you to perhaps do what I did, and tighten up your build and or stats if you're having issues, and of course explore as much as you can so you can get more of those aforementioned power-ups, as they will help you tremendously as you continue on in the DLC. It's awesome to have new Elden Ring content, and now that I've gotten past the growing pains, so to speak, of the DLC, I'm having just as much fun, if not more, as I did back when I was first playing the game in 2022. And there we go, all my favorite games I've played so far in 2024. It's been a pretty solid year of releases thus far, and there's still quite a bit I'm looking forward to for this next half of the year, but we can talk about those games once the right time arrives to do so. Last year was often considered an insane year for gaming, and yeah, it really was. I mean, by this time last year, we already had some insanely heavy hitters release, like the Dead Space remake, Hi-Fi Rush, Metroid Prime Remastered, the Resident Evil 4 remake, the System Shock remake, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and Final Fantasy XVI. In comparison, while there's still been a great quantity of games I've enjoyed released so far, I feel like none of them really hit as hard as any of those I mentioned before. Except the Thousand Year Door. Yeah, 2023 really was just on a whole other level. Anyways, I'd of course highly recommend any of my main picks for the months here, as well as the honorable mentions I listed too. Hope I was able to interest you in some great games you may have missed out on so far, and if nothing else, I hope my discussion on them all was entertaining and enjoyable. With all that being said, I think that'll do it for this video. If you made it to the end, I thank you for watching. Your continued viewership and support is greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time.